Okay, good morning and welcome to the third week, part week of Dairy Tech. We've got some really interesting sessions this week and we're going to kick off this morning with Organics, A Brave New World. This session is sponsored by the Dakin Partnership and you may well have seen their milk report for the organic sector that came out over the weekend. It's a really interesting read with some good data in it. I hope everybody has a chance to have a look at that. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Chris Walkland, who will be chairing this session, Organics, A Brave New World. Chris.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Well, welcome. Yes, welcome this morning to this morning's Dairy Tech Organic Seminar. It's always the tastiest session in Dairy Tech. A Brave New World is the title. And yeah, thanks, Rob, for your support. Your passionate support for the organic sector. Apparently I've got some housekeeping to do first, which my wife will say is a rarity. I have to remind all delegates to leave your videos off and on mute, hide non-video participants, whatever that is. Instructions are on your joining instructions. Ask questions via chat and tweet using hashtag DairyTech21. I'm delighted to have three knowledgeable and experienced panelists with us this morning, wearing hats from organisations across the organic and general farming spectrum. Some that we know well, others perhaps less well known. So firstly, I'd like to welcome Harriet O'Regan, whose day job is working for Arla on organics, but who is today wearing her Organic Trade Board hat. She's head of marketing there. And believe me, there's nothing not to love about Harriet. Listen to her biog from Twitter, and I quote, "A milk-loving advocate of the good stuff, passionate supporter of dairy farmers and proud mum of two little milk lovers." I don't need to add anything there. We've also got Roger Kerr, Chief Executive of OF&G. And most of us will be accustomed to OF&G in its respect of its inspection and certification of organic food and farming businesses. Apparently I was at Harper with Roger, but we never met on account of the fact that he was always in the library learning stuff, while I was always in the Students' Union forgetting everything. And last but not least, we have Stuart Roberts. He is the presidential deputy dog of an organisation called the National Farmers Union. Personally, I've never heard of either of them, but apparently the NFU does quite a lot in farming and he's a proper farmer from Hertfordshire. Welcome, Roger and Stuart and all you participants. The running order is Roger, Stuart and Harriet, followed by Q&A, which I hope you'll take full advantage of. So Roger, kick us off, please, with your presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session, Brave New World. Sounds slightly dystopian, but let's hope it's not in reality. As Chris suggested, I'm Chief Executive of OF&G. We certify about a third of the organic sector overall and about just over 50% of the UK land area. As he said, I went to Harper with him. He was always in the bar, I was always in the library, honest gov. I've worked with the organic sector for just over 25 years and at the moment, beyond my chief executive duties, I also chair the United Kingdom Organic Certifiers Group, which represents all the 6 UK certifiers. I also represent the UK on the IFOAM Europe Council, and I'm a director of OTB along with Harriet and the PFLA, Pasture for Life Association, and I'm also a trustee of the Organic Research Centre. So that's me. So just looking at this morning, what I want to talk about this morning is demand, delivery and diversity, and a little bit about trains and bridges. I guess we're all metaphorically stood at the station at the moment, trying to work out which train to catch. Is it going to be sustainable intensification? Is it regenerative agriculture? Is it organic? Or any number of other numerous schemes that appear to be coming towards us at the moment. So this morning, I'm going to have a look at what's going on with the organic train. So let me lead you over there. Harriet's going to cover the UK sector in quite a lot of detail, but just to begin with, I just want to have a quick look at where the market opportunity lies. I'm just trying to get the slide to it, sorry. Here we go. So, start of 10, the world organic market is equivalent in size to the global entertainment market. That's all international box office and all home entertainment. So the market for organic, I would suggest, is no longer a niche. The DTI are already looking at a significant campaign around the delivery of agri-food, and organic is quite definitely a focus within that. We also see that the EU are about to spend 86 million euros just this year promoting organic and sustainable farming. The Soil Association recent organic market report shows growth of 12.6% year on year, and that compares with Kantar data from the OTB from November last year that showed growth of 12.1%. So demand is accelerating in organic, and it's outperforming total grocery. We also know from the OTB that over a third of millennials are now saying that they are more likely to buy organic post-COVID. Now that represents a target market of 5.6 million consumers. And what that really does is reflects a significant change in consumer perceptions and attitudes. What we saw pre-lockdown is 31% of consumers were saying that they were looking to offset their environmental impacts. That has now grown to over 50%. So the direction of travel for organic is looking good. We're seeing increased growth and a significant global market for organic. In fact, OF&G have seen an increase in inquiries of 85% in the last year. So there's certainly a lot of interest around organic. So where do we stand in terms of the delivery of organic? Let's start with Brexit, Boris's oven-ready deal, so to speak. Well, it wasn't quite oven-ready, it turns out, in that it took him 5 days before the end of the transition agreement to actually get it signed off. But from an organic perspective, what we have within that is a 3-year equivalency agreement, which is excellent news. And there was some concern that we weren't going to have that. So it's great that we have got it. But let's be clear, that gives us just 36 months before we start the whole thing all over again. And in that period of time, the EU are looking to implement their new organic regulation 848. So that's something we need to consider going into the future. There's also an issue around the authorised trader scheme for goods going into Northern Ireland. That's due to finish at the end of March. That's going to also have a significant impact, potentially not only on organic operators, but on the food sector overall. But certainly organic is not going to be left out in that issue. So that also presents a significant issue for us in terms of delivery of organic. The other area in terms of delivery of organic is with Elm. We've seen that consumers are embracing organic. They're seeing consumers embracing sustainable food systems. So it's incredibly frustrating that we're not seeing an equivalent recognition within DEFRA and its Elms. There is the Sustainable Farming Incentive, which is a good initiative. It's looking to deliver on public goods, which obviously we will be perfectly happy to support. But it really doesn't cover the things that organic delivers. For example, one of the advanced standards, this is higher standards, suggesting that 10% of cultivated land and temporary grassland should be managed to provide all year round resources for farmland, birds, pollinators, and beneficial insects. The fact of the matter is that organic actually delivers 100% of the land area doing exactly that thing. So SFI doesn't really embrace all the things that organic delivers. And DEFRA have said that they want to recognise agroecological approaches. They've got it in the Ag Bill. And yet, when it comes to it, we're not seeing that recognition within Elm. In contrast to that, the EU are saying that they're looking for a 25% of organic land area by 2030. So there is a significant opportunity And we need to be really careful that if we're going to compete in a world market and if we're going to take an opportunity, then we really need to support domestic demand. Now, we've talked about demand, but I think we have to look at the future in terms of how we get from where we are now to where we want to get to. We need to look at bridging that is from where we are here to where we want to get to in terms of a sustainable farming system. That means we don't have to burn down existing bridges. I'm not suggesting that, but organic definitely represents a bridge from where we are now to where we need to get to. And I think we have to recognize that organic farming in the end is farming with the natural world. Now, there is talk about premium and the fact that organic farmers already receive a premium. Why should they then receive additional support from ELM? But the premium compensates for the risks associated with farming organically. It covers the yield differentials that we're aware of, and it also reflects the additional management complexity that you find with organic systems. What we're looking for are payments that support the multiple public goods that organic delivers simultaneously. Now, it's not as if there aren't already payments out there. Government already have supported conversion, and they are already providing support payments for ongoing organic farming. So it's not as if we're asking for something new or different. It's just something we need to see recognised within ELM going forward. And finally, I wanted to touch on GE. Obviously, the government have just launched a genetic engineering consultation. And again, using the bridge analogy, to get where we are now, to get to where we want to get to, we will need multiple bridges. There's no doubt about that. The issue, though, is that many consumers are not comfortable with consuming GM and GE products. A recent survey showed 60% of consumers wanted to continue with the ban on GM. Now, whether it's 40%, 60%, 50%, I don't know. What I do know is that there is a significant proportion of the population that want to avoid consuming GM and GE products. Now, organic has GM prohibited. So if you want to avoid GM and GO, then you can buy organic. So if we're going to provide that level of choice to consumers, then we have to have resilient and strict coexistence rules. And therefore, we want government in their regulatory consultation to recognise the need for coexistence. Another point that George Eustice made when he announced the consultation was that he said that genetic engineering would unlock established benefits for nature, the environment, would help farmers resist pests and disease, extreme weather, and produce healthy and nutritious food. Now, to a greater and lesser extent, organic does all that already. It's already out there. It's already doing it. So why are government not also embracing organic in terms of delivery on those things, the same as they are around GE? And certainly we would want to see that support, and we'd certainly want to see the level of investment in terms of R&D that GE and other technologies are also getting at the moment. So finally, to conclude then, we've talked about demand, $100 billion globally for organic. We've talked about delivery, some of the issues around Brexit and around ELMS, and we've talked about the need for diversity. And there is a need for diversity if we're going to deliver on what we want to do in terms of sustainable food systems. But let's be clear, I'm not saying that organic is the Holy Grail. But what I am saying is it provides a solid bridge to the future. At the end of the day, as I say, organic farming is farming with the natural world. So back to my opening analogy, while others are clearly on board and settling into the organic journey, it's critical that UK farming, the environment, and the UK food sector do not get left behind. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Roger. A lot of positive stats there, generally optimistic outlook, a lot of potential, but with some political headwinds. Okay, so now I'll hand over to Stuart. Over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and it's a real pleasure to be with you all. I've never been described as Deputy Dog, Chris, for which I appreciate, and also it's always slightly nerve-wracking speaking on the same panel as Roger or anyone from OF&G. Because clearly, if I disagree with anything that Roger says, I then slightly worry when my next inspection comes round. Luckily, not due for a little while, so hopefully we'll be fine. But actually, as it happens, I think, Roger, I hope anyway, there's quite a lot you've said that I'm going to build on. I thought when I was putting together some notes to speak to everyone this morning, I'd touch a little bit on consumption. I may touch a little bit on Elms, and then I was going to talk about GE. As you've done that, Roger, I will slightly change tact and talk about a few other bits. But I think actually in general, there is a really optimistic tone to be struck, but against the backdrop of a fairly challenging environment at the moment. And my history with organic, so I am an organic farmer. I have no issues of pointing out the reason I'm an organic farmer is for economic reasons. That's really what drives it. It performs much better in my business, and it's what my customers demand of me. But I was thinking a little bit earlier about my, if you like, some of my history with organic. And I didn't get good enough grades at my A-levels to either spend time in the bar or the library at Harper Adams. So I ended up at Aberystwyth, of all places. And Aberystwyth at the time was a very interesting place. There was the likes of Nick Lampkin there. I think probably at the time, it took organic probably more seriously than probably any of the other academic institutions. But there was something more interesting going on in Aberystwyth as I look back now. I remember it was almost the first term I was there. Rachel's Dairies opened their new dairy due to increasing demands. And I think it's the dairy they're still operating out of today. And I want to return to Rachel's Dairies later on in what I've got to say. I think I also remember well that time when organic dairy was not in such a positive state to where it is today. I remember the days where there was huge oversupply. It was basically being, and guys on this call will know better than me, but basically from an outsider's view, it was being dumped on the commercial market and it just didn't look good. And for me, part of the problem there is you've got to make sure you look at supply and demand. Massive oversupply, and if the demand isn't there, then you have a problem. But we're now in a world where we're very successfully exporting products, and we're also very successfully exporting and developing some exciting brands in organic. I think really the organic sector has grabbed, if you like, the branding story, has grabbed the story, if you like, of its products, and I see lessons actually for the non-organic sector in some of what organic dairy has done. And Roger touched well on what's happened in terms of the organic category and its performance. Performed very well in 2020. I think somebody may correct me if I'm wrong. It's about been the biggest growth in 15 odd years. A very odd year, 2020. Clearly, we would rather all be at a Dairy Tech event rather than doing this by the method of Zoom. But actually, we have seen some good figures. But what I want to slightly challenge the sector on is whether that development, whether that success story has been driven through the word organic, or whether it's actually been driven through the stories and the brands that happen to be organic. And I don't think the answer is yes or no to either of those, but I think actually there is something there that can be flagged, I suspect, for the wider dairy industry. I also think that when it comes to dairy, okay, it doesn't matter if this is organic dairy or conventional dairy. I don't like using the word conventional because it's almost as if organic isn't conventional, and arguably organic is a very conventional production system, but the pressures will be huge. I talked, in fact, I think the last time I was on a platform with Chris, I talked very much about those challenges: the environmental challenge, the nutrition challenge, the animal welfare challenge. But I struggle to find a product actually, other than dairy, that, yeah, what other product is there out there that is more wholesome, more environmentally positive, more nutritious than British milk? And I think it's something, as I say, I want to come back to this point because I think it's something where we can play even more on the positives that are both dairy, but also organic dairy. But we're also under some huge challenges elsewhere. If I look at, and Roger touched, how late in the day it was before we got that equivalence issue. The fact that even with that equivalence issue being dealt with, there are still some big challenges when it comes to that US trade, and effectively the fallout still from the Airbus-Boeing dispute is still affecting us. But I also hear some really, really positive stories around trade. When I was in the States about 18 months ago now, predominantly looking at beef as it happens when I was out there, but also looking at retail. When I see some of our British cheeses and some of our organic British cheeses on American retail shelves, there's a huge sense of pride in that. And I do see some major opportunities there. But I also think we as a sector, and particularly probably the organic sector, but arguably the entire sector, need to do a lot more in this area. We need to really refocus some of our efforts. We need to improve our exports. We need to improve our market development. And we need to look at what others do. We need to up our game in this area. I look across the water at Ireland and the work that Bord Bia do, the way that Bord Bia is funded. And I can't remember the exact figure off the top of my head, but there is about €8 of taxpayer funding going into Bord Bia for every €1 of levy money that goes in. That is also then about focusing on new markets. They have a government that is absolutely focusing on those, opening up those markets. And that's really important because I know we've got the products. The farmers on this call, I know one or two of them have got the products, but we've got to have those markets. And that's about hard yards. That is not about big politics in Westminster. That's about getting on aeroplanes. It's about building relationships and opening up those markets. I was challenged many years ago now about why couldn't we get beef into China when the Irish had done the same. They were about 5, 6, 7 years ahead of us. It was not because of their BSE status. It was not because of their health credentials. It was not because of their green and pleasant land. It was basically because they had a minister in Simon Coveney at the time who would get on an aeroplane, who would go to China, who would build those relationships. And we need to see the same. I also am very encouraged actually to see AHDB recognizing these opportunities, and who better from an organic dairy perspective than Nicholas Sapphire himself, who knows exactly how to do some of this. But I touched earlier about dairy being under pressure, and it's something that I've spoken to one or two people who have joined us this morning about. We have got to be on the front foot on this. As I say, we've got what I believe is the most nutritious product, what is the most environmentally sound product, but we've got to be on the front foot because those threats from dairy alternatives are real, and they also tell their story phenomenally well. Correction, they tell a story phenomenally well, but we've got the best possible story. And in organics, arguably, we've got another chapter to that story, but we've got to communicate better. We've got to communicate with that population of consumers, Roger, that you touched on earlier on. we've got to talk about our positives. We've got to talk about what we bring to a modern society. So how does British organic dairying deliver on society's aspirations? I fundamentally believe it does. It delivers on its aspirations when it comes to climate change, when it comes to biodiversity, when it comes to the fantastic landscape that was in Roger's slides earlier on. But we've also got to think about some of the other things that will be framing this issue. And I'm not going to go in detail on ELMS. I think Roger articulated it extremely well. But we've also got to encourage farmer uptake and organic farmer uptake in the test and trials. It's really important we do that. I also think the gene editing argument is a big one that is going at the moment. We've got to be clear, gene editing and genetic modification are not necessarily the same thing. And we've got to look at how we see the opportunities in there for effectively what I see as speeded up natural breeding, whereas genetic modification is different to that. But what I want to also do this morning, and this is really the last point I wanted to touch on, I wanted to go slightly back to Rachel's Dairies of all places. I want to also look at what can the conventional sector learn from organics. Well, first of all, I think we can all look at how we can export better. I say some of the opportunities I've seen, investment in exports in organics has been really impressive. But I also, and I slightly struggle with this next point, is I want to, and I don't know the answer to this, in some ways I'm almost setting it as a question, is what is the thing that is driving consumer choices when it comes to organic? And Roger, you touched rightly earlier about some growing demand. But I do sometimes wonder whether actually the word organic isn't necessarily the thing that is the selling point. I've always believed that actually what organic gives you is a set of rules that people understand how you farm by those rules. But what I also understand is people buy stories, they buy provenance, they buy trust, and ultimately they buy brands. So actually, and you can't separate these two out, but is the phenomenal success that's been Rachel's Dairies, is it because it's organic, or actually is it because it's just fantastic products produced in a fantastic way that meet the consumer's demand? And for me, it's almost as if the organic piece is a secondary message that underpins all that those brands stand for, but it isn't necessarily the thing that's driving the demand. And I had a great visit for that short period of time in 2020 when we were allowed out of our houses and out of our offices. I did one visit. I only got to do one visit. It was to Yeo Valley, a fantastic business, which for me is about, yes, it's about delivering organic, but it's about delivering quality. It's about delivering a story. It's about delivering sustainability. And those are the things actually that we need to really drive home. And arguably organic, I think, underpins that. But I also think there are more opportunities. As I say, I'm optimistic. I'm really optimistic when it comes to this sector. And there will be more opportunities. I look at, years ago, I had a little look at infant formula in China, which actually is not driven by price. It is not driven by anything other than trust. And we produce some of the best, most trusted products in the world, underpinned by our standards. And it's really important that we build more on that, both from a conventional point of view, but also from an organic point of view. And that takes investment. That takes investment at every point in the supply chain. And all of us need to see more investment across the supply chain, whether that be in processing, whether that be on farming. We've got huge opportunities, as I say, both at home and abroad. And I am optimistic. I was slightly worried with Roger's last slide, the man on the railway tracks with the train. I was slightly concerned, Roger, at one point that the train was coming towards the man. I firmly believe that it was doing exactly what I think you tried to illustrate, which is actually the man was chasing the train. I actually believe that we're already on the train, but we've just got to make sure that we're clear about where that destination is and how we can produce more great products, sell those products, sell that story, and be on the front foot when it comes to those big challenges we've got. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, I would echo a lot of what you said. One thing that had gone unnoticed prior to Brexit was the number of people that Ornua had put on the ground around the world. They put 70 to 80 new sets of boots on the ground all around the world just to drive those exports away from the UK if the worst came to the worst.
It's a really good point. Just picking that up, Chris, and you look at what Borbia have got in terms of resource around the world, okay, and it's exactly the same point. What have we got? We got one person through AHDB in China. It is not good enough. We need to see more.
But at least there's a new focus at AHDB, which has got to be welcomed.
Absolutely.
Anyway, Harriet, you're on mute. Not on mute. Hello.
Hi.
Over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, I'm going to close it out this morning, and my job is to talk a little bit more about some of the things that Stuart and Roger have already touched on, but maybe with a little bit more of an in-depth look on what's happening for the consumer, and particularly how they are looking at organic and how the sector is evolving. And I think the key message is that it's absolutely a positive story, and I'm hoping you go away with even more confidence after the next 10 minutes in terms of what's happening for this sector and for the industry as a whole. So yeah, Chris mentioned I wear two hats. My day job is heading up milk and organic for Arla. So the first job is to champion milk and champion adding value to milk on a daily basis. And the second job is working with the Organic Trade Board, with Roger and the team, driving the organic sector as a whole. And I think what's great to talk about today is that actually those two jobs, championing British milk, championing added value milk, and also championing organic, are actually getting easier, despite a very tough year in lots of different ways. From a consumer point of view, all the messages and the stories that Stuart talked about are getting easier to tell, and they're getting more and more relevant. So those are some of the things that I'll talk a little bit about. Just check I can move on. I'm struggling to move the slides on, actually, guys. Could you just move them on for me? Can you just move the slide one on? There you go. Okay. So as Roger mentioned, the data from an organic sector perspective is looking incredibly positive. The Soil Association launched their annual report last week, and the data is even more positive than what I'm showing here. We're looking into a decade now of significant growth in the organic sector, consistent and accelerating. And what's really positive to see is that not only do we have 9 out of 10 people in the UK consuming organic products, and that's on the increase, but we're actually seeing those consumers consuming it more regularly, putting more in their basket, spending more on organic. Now, I often get asked the question, well, you know, yes, that's all very well, but look back at the last recession. If we head into a recession again, aren't we going to see the same dip in the organic sector? And we're very confident as an industry that that isn't going to be the case. And the reasons for that are, if you look back previously to where we were at the last recession with organic, it was a kind of a new thing on the block. The retailers had rushed to launch a lot of ranges in organic, perhaps before the consumer was ready and before we had that loyal base. We now have a very loyal base of organic consumers who are expecting that core range of products in their retailers. We know that retailers are looking to put more range in over the next 12 months, not less. So that certainly is not going to see that big step back. And some of the reasons why people are buying into organic are actually likely to continue. So particularly the organic sector has grown with the growth of online retail, and that's something that we're expecting to continue. But equally, the macro trends that are driving organic, some of which Stuart talked about, you know, the desire for healthier products, the desire for sustainable products, and the need for confidence and trust on where those products have come from, are all things that aren't going away. So we're absolutely not expecting to see that dip. If anything, we're just asking the question, where can organic go? It certainly feels like the time is now. We just flick on the next slide, please. The other confidence boost, I think, to look at organic is that you're seeing growth across all of the different sectors. Can you just move the slide on, please? Thanks. So we're seeing growth across the organic sectors, ahead of conventional, and in some places absolutely flying, particularly organic wine. We seem to have all reached for, certainly I have, within the confines of lockdown. Organic health and beauty, textile sector really growing well, and good to see things like meat sector really positively growing. Dairy, on the other hand, has actually had a bit of a tougher year. It's not to say that 12% growth on dairy, organic dairy, isn't really positive, and it absolutely is. But particularly within my area on milk, we have suffered this year because of the lack of the cutting in ranges that we had to do to just keep up with demand. And organic that relies on smaller pack sizes has suffered more so than conventional in that. But what's, I think, positive underneath that is that actually that isn't a structural consumer issue. That's just literally been a supply issue. And once we see the market stabilizing this year, we anticipate that not to continue. So again, just a really positive message across the board. If you flick on, please. The other really good reason, I think, to be confident organic, and one thing that I'm very proud of, and I hope that's really driven the sector this year, is the work that we've been doing as an organic trade board, together with the Soil Association, really driving Organic September and the activity that we put around that this year. So Organic September has been around for nearly a decade. The Soil Association have driven that, but this year, for the first time, we really worked all together as one industry to push this event and make it happen in retail and also on social media and in the media as a whole. And we had by far and away the most successful Organic September we've ever had. So a big increase in just the online presence of Organic September as a hashtag. We saw 7 million people read stories and see media about the rise in organic and what was happening in sustainability and organic as a whole. We saw over 310 retailers getting involved, and great to see all the independent retailers wanting to showcase their organic ranges and get involved in our free seed giveaway. And we also did some long form content, and it was excellent to see how much positive feedback we got about people really wanting to hear about what farmers are doing around sustainability. We worked with a sustainability author in these podcasts and explained what organic was, explained some of the new thinking, the new conversation, and we had some fantastic feedback on that as well. So it's just been a really positive year. Amazing to sort of get these statistics and get this performance, given where we were maybe back last March, where we didn't think we were going to have a year really on Organic September at all, and already planning for Organic September 2021, which we anticipate will be even bigger. The other positive thing, if you just move on a slide, for this year was the retailers getting behind it, and actually by far and away all of the major malts that lead in organic getting behind Organic September this year. And if you think again that in May in 2020 we had pretty much a shutdown on all shopper activity in store, to get this much activity away was absolutely phenomenal. Particularly Sainsbury's leading in the middle there, doing some fantastic work on promotional ends, activity within the produce area, little flashes on shelves so that consumers could find organic, and stuff at the front of store as well to really call it out and make people think about their purchases. And great also to see Tesco getting organic for the first time involved in their Tesco Love Stories corporate activity. So really positive to see that happening as well. What I would say is the amount of conversations I'm having now for 2021 versus what I was having last year, I'm even more confident that we'll see a huge amount of retailer activity this year in store around September. The other reason I think to be very positive, if you just move on a slide, please, is the conversation about organic. And it was interesting to hear Stuart thinking about actually, you know, what is organic about? Is it actually just a set of rules that, you know, that farmers abide by, or is it actually part of a conversation about where we need our agriculture to go? And I'm really positive and feel very excited about the conversation that is happening at actually a broader level than just about organic, but the conversation about not only the role that agriculture can have in climate change and in addressing the sustainability issues that we have, but actually as a potential solution to it. We're very proud of Dan Burdett, one of our farmers, who's just done an Nuffield scholarship in regenerative agriculture, and it's great to see that conversation, you know, out there and talked about, and talking about how farmers can move on. And it's that link between organic and sustainability which we think is absolutely key in order to keep organic relevant and make organic more relevant in the future. And that's really good, if you flick on one please, because it's what consumers want to hear about. So I've been stunned really to see the increase in awareness and demand by consumers for sustainable action and for more sustainable choices in their shopping basket over the last 5 years, certainly that I've been working in this sector. You know, we're not talking about a small niche group of people who care about this stuff. We're talking about the mainstream, you know, 2 in 3 consumers wanting to make a change. 50% increases, massive increases in the amount that people are demanding sustainable choices, and you know, more than half of people saying that they feel that climate change is more of a crisis than COVID-19. This is really big, important stuff for our consumers, and it's there that we believe that organic can absolutely have its relevance. If you just flick on one of the questions I sometimes get asked is actually, well, aren't a lot of people buying organic because of health and more of a selfish reason? And actually, yes, they are. Health is still very much the #1 reason why people are buying into organic. But what we have seen is that the environment and other sort of we benefits rather than just the me benefits have risen massively within that. And I actually don't think you can unlock those two things if you think about the health of me versus the health of the planet. They're very, very interconnected. So we don't necessarily need to choose what we're talking about. The two can work hand in hand, but we certainly know that the sustainability issue is one that is very much being talked about more and more by consumers. Little bit more data just showing that how this is changing and how it's changing post-COVID. So if you just flick onto the next slide. I think going back to sort of 2012, 2013, the UK consumer was a little bit behind some other countries across the world in terms of its consciousness around sustainability. We've absolutely caught up, and we're very much now, you know, leading the way in terms of countries whose consumers really are demanding more sustainable choices. And interestingly, what Stuart was talking about that sort of trust as well, and consumers looking, nearly 3/4 of consumers actually wanting brands that reflect their personal values, and that's that's the majority of people wanting that. So those stories that we're telling around where products come from, how they're produced, that's absolutely what consumers are wanting to hear, because they want the confidence to be able to shop in that way. Just final slide on stats and consumer confidence. What we are really proud of is that actually throughout COVID, we're seeing that link between organic and sustainability grow. More and more shoppers recognizing that actually organic offers a way, a choice, and a simple, easy, accessible choice to buy more sustainably. But there is still a gap. There's a value gap, because we can see on that data on the right hand side, you can see that shoppers who are wanting to buy sustainably, not all of them realize that actually organic is a choice that they can make, or that they're not all as understanding that actually organic is a more sustainable choice. So linking those two together is the value gap that we can put together to help us to continue to accelerate the growth of the sector. So that's a little bit just about the consumer. I hope that gives you a lot of confidence that we're heading in the right direction, and that this key link to sustainability is where we see the opportunity for organic. Just finally, in terms of what the Organic Trade Board are doing and how we continue to support the sector, just flick onto the final slide, please. So a little bit like this, I'm spending a lot of time at the moment talking about what's happening for the consumer through insights and strategy sessions, particularly with the retailers, to understand how they can win in this really value-added sector. We anticipate a bigger and better campaign for 2021. Nature Has the Answer campaign will continue, and we'll refresh it a little bit, but we hope to make that even bigger and better than it was this year. We also are working closely with retailers to develop sort of bespoke activity for them, so that if they're actually wanting to push organic, and some of them are looking to do it right across the year, not just in September, that we can actually direct consumers, direct shoppers into store when those offers are on or when that activity is running. And we can use our social channels to do that. And we can also use the social channels of the Organic Trade Board to help sort of provide a platform for small producers, independent retailers, and as an industry as a whole to come together to drive organic. So that's all I had to share. Hopefully that's given you as much confidence as I have in where we're going. I think it's a really positive outlook. The time really does feel like it's now for organic. We're coming out of COVID much stronger than we ever thought we would do. So really positive outlook going forward into this year.
Excellent, thanks Harriet. Are we going to get the other panelists back on the screens? Okay, we've got some time for questions now. One I've got as a result of this is, it's great to hear the positivity that that the speakers have emphasized today, and that retailers are supporting the sector. But grassroots farmers, poor farmers like Stuart, have got some real financial headwinds coming. Is that positivity, is that support getting to farmers? Because the organic milk price compared to the conventional price has been declining over the years. So are they financially supporting the sector as well as with their in-store activities and promotions? Harriet.
Yeah, I was going to say, coming to me with that. Yeah, I mean, it's not to say I talk very much about the positivity from a consumer point of view. I don't want to be naive to the fact that it is still a really tough market out there, and the gap between conventional milk and organic milk is still big. It is still quite a bit for people to pay more. You also have in retailers, when you go into the supermarket, you have a very volume driven fixture. It's often hard to find the organic milk. It's often hidden up on the shelf up at the top, for example. So there are some real barriers to overcome. It's not always as easy as we would like to get consumers to switch, and I think that's what the retailers are recognizing, that they have to work hard to drive that change in behavior. And as I say, it has been a fairly tough year for organic milk in particular, in terms of some of those ranges not being available, that supply not being available. So it has been a bit tougher within organic milk actually than it has been within the sector overall. A little bit harder for the brands to play out, but certainly, you know, the organic brand that we have, which we're very proud of, which Stuart mentioned, Rangio Valley, has had a very, very positive year, and we're super proud of the performance there. But that doesn't necessarily dictate the pricing within the overall market. So it is tough, but I would like to think that, and I'm very confident that the retailers are backing organic more than ever before, and hopefully that will translate as we move forward.
Stuart, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, if I could just come in quickly, Chris. I think for me, this also highlights why it's important to have multiple different outlets. Yeah, if you purely look at growth or not growth in the retail sector, actually, and don't look at the exports, the processing sector, it's really important that we have, you know, multiple legs on that stool. It is important that ultimately the commercials get back to farm, because that is what drives us. You know, I said it in my opening introduction, I'm organic. Okay, I'm an organic farmer for one reason only. It's what drove me into it. It was economics, and that's why I did it. We need to do that. But I also think, and it follows on a little bit from something Harriet was saying earlier, and she touched on, you know, what is organic. And I think sometimes we need to answer that question better. I think if I look back at, and I may criticize a few people here, if I look back at some of the high priests of organic from many years ago, for whom organic was a religion, it wasn't really a production system. Actually, what they tried to do is they tried to paint organic as being everything to everyone. And I think what it did is it confused the consumer. So actually, I might be in it for the environment. You might be in it, Chris, for animal welfare. Roger might be in it because he thinks it tastes better. And then what happened, I think we then went into that recession that Harriet touched on, and people almost couldn't justify to themselves why they were choosing that premium product. And we've got to be better at that going forward. I also think we are heading for difficult times. You know, this current situation we're all living through, this money needs to be paid back. The economy will be tough. And we've got to be better at justifying that. But once we can justify that, then actually we've got to get more of that premium back to farm. Because as you said, quite rightly say, Chris, that's what will drive people to enter a market. It won't be because we feel good about it. It'll be because the economics tell me it's the right thing to do.
Okay, here's a great question that's just come in. I'm going to go to Roger first. What do the panel think organic farmers should be doing themselves to promote their industry? Let's have one from each of you. So how can the farmers help you guys promote their sector?
That's a good question. I think my experience of this is that where farmers can really bring value to this is around the stories that they have in terms of their personal experiences. And I think time and again, we have seen where people have given out personal stories and made the message a real personal one. I think that's a really powerful way of getting the message across. I have an experience. I was involved with Cal and Wen years ago, and we wanted to do a campaign to promote organic milk. And one of the things one of our guys came up with was a farmer finds a wife sort of thing. So they put stickers on the bottles of different, about 4 or 5 young farmers who supposedly were looking for a partner. And at the time we thought, oh, this is madness. You know, this is going to get nowhere. But anyway, the guy involved was went away and stood on the bottling line, and him and a friend stuck the stickers on, and it went global. It absolutely went global. We ended up being on the Graham Norton. He was on the Graham Norton show at one point. We had interviews with Russia and guys in Australia and all the rest of it. And it was about that interconnection, that personal connection between suddenly the farmer was no longer some unknown quantity down the road. This is a real person with the same challenges and the same struggles. They've still got to get up in the morning. They've still got to get their kids to school. They've still got to pay the mortgage. They've still got to do all the things that everyone else does. And I think that's a really, really critical part of it. So if there's one thing farmers can do, and I know it's one thing that Harriet is looking at this year in terms of trying to get that connection between what's happening on the farm, on the ground, in real life, and with the consumer.
Harriet?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. We often talk about the magic moment of organic, which is captured often best by when people have been to Yeo Valley, which Stuart talked about. It really is that kind of moment when you go, this is what it's about. And we know that consumers really long for that connection with where their food comes from more and more. So if you could bottle that and share those stories and sort of that's the reason I do this, because of the people I've met and the farmers that I've talked to who inspire me hugely, and what they're so creative and they think so differently. That's what inspires me. And if I could give that to every consumer, I know that they'd be a huge organic loyalist.
Mr. Farmer?
Chris, I hate panels where everyone says I agree with.
Yeah, I know, what's the difference?
But the reality is, I've written 2 words down, and that's stories and authenticity. I think it's absolutely critical. We've not been great storytellers, and we've got to be better, but we've got to do it ourselves. And every single farm, anyone who's got one of these things, I'm just checking there's nothing on the screen now, but anyone who's got one of these things in their hands can connect with consumers all around the world. And we've got to tell our story. But the other bit, and just to add something, so it's not entirely, I'm just copying what the others have said. We've also got to base our stories and our narrative on rock solid foundations. We can't just do, British is best because we're British. Actually, it's got to be based on our standards. It's got to be based on fact and evidence, because otherwise we will build brands, we will build stories, but they'll fall apart. So yes, authenticity, yes, stories, but they've got to be built on solid foundations.
I would add that farmers are a million times better at telling the stories than they were perhaps 10 years ago.
I'd agree entirely with that, Chris.
There are some fantastic ambassadors out there on social media, and all power to their elbow and their fingertips.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so here's a retailer question again. How has organic benefited or not benefited from the rise in online?
Coming to me, I'm assuming, very significantly, actually. And I think what's positive is we don't anticipate that to change significantly once, consumers have absolutely found online shopping as a result of COVID. It was on the increase already, but it's just had an absolute surge this year. And as a result, organic has benefited from that. And I think that one of the reasons for that is because it's actually easier to find organic products when you're buying online. If you go and try and find organic in the supermarket, it's really hard. Even if you're looking, which I do regularly, you can't find them. Whereas actually on an online search, it's super easy. And the other sort of thing that's changed, and you'll see within the essay report, that box schemes are really on the increase as well, and direct delivery is something that consumers are seeing the benefiting more, partly because it's convenient, but also because it's where it's come from. It's nice to understand that it's actually from a farm or a group of farms, and that's something that also consumers are enjoying and benefiting from. So those are the main reasons, but it's great to see, and we don't see it going away.
Excellent. Here's one for Roger and his bridge. Do you see regenerative organic as the other end of the bridge?
Yeah. Well, I would see them as a
threat, I guess. Is it?
I would suggest there's 2 bridges. I'm not saying that there can't be more than one bridge. I think organic provides a bridge. It's, as Stuart's indicated, there are a set of standards, and the reason there's a set of standards is because ultimately you have to codify what it is that you're doing. And whilst I know Stuart and others, I'm sure, will find it frustrating on occasions where they have to abide by the rules, the reality is that if you don't have a set of rules, then nobody's really very clear in terms of what it is that you stand for or don't stand for. And certainly the reason the organic standards came in was prior to that, it was a little bit like the Wild West, in that anybody could claim anything, and who was going to prove them different. And I think what we have to recognise, and I certainly think, is that in terms of regenerative and agroecological farming, at some point someone's going to have to codify what that actually means, because at the moment it feels like a word on the page, but we don't actually know what it really means. So yeah, I think organic is definitely part of that whole regenerative movement in a broader sense, but it is the only internationally recognized or independently audited legal agroecological standard, and from that point of view, it is unique from that perspective. I don't know whether does that answer your question, Chris? I hope so.
Not my question, but yeah, I think
well, the question, sorry, the question then.
There's a couple come in on GM, one relating to the COVID vaccine, which is an interesting angle. I guess that's, people aren't going to eat GM food, but they will have a GM jab. And the second angle on that one is, where does the panel stand on gene editing, both animal and plant, especially in cases where it can have an impact on carbon emissions? You're nodding, Stuart.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of bits in here, Chris. So first of all, we all, I think, at times contribute to mistaking and muddying the waters between GM and GE. Okay, I'm very clear that GM and GE are different things. I think when it comes to GE, I think part of it, in fact, if we go back to GM, part of the problem with GM is we're all dealing with the hangover of how atrociously it was communicated at the outset, because actually it was all about economic benefits, and arguably economic benefits for big parts of the supply chain that were not the farmer. If we actually have a discussion about how can genetic engineering or gene editing, how gene editing can give massive benefits to human society, meeting its aspirations by basically just speeding up the natural plant breeding cycle, then I think you potentially have a very different discussion. Now, whether that's allowed in particular production systems or not, I don't know. But I think there are some real potential benefits if we can use gene editing to, as I say, address those fundamentals. And the biggest fundamental society faces is climate change. So actually, I think there is some potential there. Now, Roger may well know better than me, but I also think, and I had heard, but I don't know if this is true, there are some organic certification schemes around the world where GE is, I think there's 2 countries where GE products are allowed in organic farming. Now, I may be wrong, Roger, but that's something I'd heard the other day. And I think actually we need to look at what is it, what does it bring, not just throw the baby out with the bathwater because it shares the same first letter with GM.
Yeah, from my perspective, I suppose there's a couple of things. At the moment, the European Court of Justice ruled last year to say that genetic engineering is the same as GM. So there is from a purely, again, without getting up on standards, but from a UK and EU position, as far as the organic regulation is concerned, it is still deemed to be genetically modified. Now, whether that ECJ ruling stands, etc., is to be seen. But at the moment, it's still classed as genetic engineering. There are some concerns about genetic engineering, and I do recognise the value of genetic engineering in terms of human health. But we are talking about something slightly different in that putting something into a human body, and obviously, if we can find a way of being able to deal with cystic fibrosis or something like that, then who's to say we shouldn't be using technologies to do that? But it is contained within the human organism. Where we're talking about genetic engineering, there is an issue where you're starting to release organisms into the natural environment. And I think the natural environment already faces some significant challenges around biodiversity collapse, etc. And therefore, I think we have to be very careful about how we go about releasing these organisms into the environment without having them properly tested and checked. And I think that's maybe one of my concerns. And I think what we've seen with genetic modification is that where those products were released into the environment, say in the US, what we have seen is then the development of these super weeds that can't then be dealt with by glyphosate, and we end up having to actually spray more and more herbicides to try and control these things, and they are starting to become a real problem. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen with genetic engineering. I think we just have to be mindful that where we've got to in the past, there have been these challenges. And once you've released these genes into the environment, then you have, in some respects, opened Pandora's box. You're not going to be able to put it back in the box. So I think we have to be really careful about how we look at this and how we make sure that the aspects that we're looking to develop through genetic engineering don't then end up having unforeseen impacts on our natural environment. It is already under a significant amount of pressure. We certainly don't want to be putting it under even more pressure. So that's not to say that I'm against it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here saying that genetic engineering should be banned or all the rest of it. What I'm saying is there needs to be a really, really solid regulatory framework that makes sure that these products are tested, and they're peer reviewed. They're not tested by the people that are actually developing this stuff, but something that's actually independently tested so that we know that what they're delivering is actually what they're saying, and we're clear in terms of what the impacts those could have on our broader natural environment.
I don't disagree with lots of that, Roger, and I think we also need to look at sometimes the ownership of these and about how, you know, the balance of power effectively in the supply chain is another thing that we need to look at here. But I also think for some of these things, which is effectively some of these are crosses that could quite happily happen in nature, then actually we need to look at them potentially differently. And I think there's a whole discussion to be had around this, but I don't disagree with some of the points you made.
There is. I think there is a suggestion that it's a very precise process. It's not that precise, and there is collateral damage around DNA strands from genetic engineering, and therefore we have to be aware that that could happen, and therefore there can be unforeseen circumstances. So it's not that we shouldn't look at this technology. I'm not saying we shouldn't not look at it. I just think we should be clear and clear-eyed in terms of what it is that we're doing here, and make sure that we don't end up fundamentally in a worse position potentially longer term on the basis that this is going to provide the future. And I do also say, and I go back to my presentation, in that I think there are opportunities that organic and other things can deliver to this debate. And it isn't simply how we're going to control climate change. Well, the only way we can do that is through genetic engineering. There are other ways of farming. There are other approaches that we can take that can also have an impact on it. And actually what we need to do is make sure that we're looking at all the different options that are available to us, not simply thinking that GE is going to be is going to be a silver bullet that's going to answer all our prayers, because quite frankly, I don't think that's the case.
And just coming back on that, I think there's a really interesting point in time at the moment. And I think over the last few years, I touched about the old high priests of the organic movement, and Roger's not one of them, okay? I think we know who some of them were, and it was a religion. I think what we're seeing now is organic farming systems being picked up by conventional farmers, by people having a really healthy discussion about what we can all learn from each other, and that helps farming and food production across the board. And I really hope, and I don't see those divides that was organic versus conventional in years gone by, and some people still inhabit that place, but I don't see it now. And I think it's really healthy that we're all able to learn the very best from each other to basically ultimately help our businesses, help our sector, and help society.
Yeah, one thing that the organic sector does really well is actually cooperate with each other, which conventional could learn a lot from. But I'm going to draw this to a close now. I'm going to draw it to a close by bringing it back.
Chris, can I just make one point?
Yeah, sure.
The last slide on my presentation, Stuart, the train could have been coming straight at him, or it could have been going away. The result's exactly the same. You're either going to get flattened or you're going to get left behind.
Okay, let's draw this to a close now. And I think one of the key takeout messages of this seminar has to be the fantastic potential that the sector has got compared to the reality of what is happening on farms. And there's a couple of questions come in, question/stroke statements. If organic farming businesses are becoming unsustainable financially, how will we satisfy this growing consumer demand? And that's linked with another to Harriet. What level of premium do retailers feel they can achieve? So quick answers from the three of you to draw it to a close, please. Harriet, if you go first.
In all honesty, I don't think they really know yet. I think there's a lot of discussion and debate and thinking about where the retailers, obviously it's their challenge in terms of where they price their organic products and the gap between conventional and organic. And I don't really think they've agreed it yet. If you look at other markets, it's more like 20-30% premium. So it's massively different than it is here, where it can be up to 70, 80, 90% premium. But you know, that equally, when sometimes when the retailers brought those prices down, it hasn't driven the market in the way that we'd like it to. So it's a fine balance, and obviously there's that supply demand balance that we've got to get right as well. But all I think we need to be feeling positive about is that the customers, the retailers, wanting to drive this, they want to be seen to be pushing organic, and they will be doing that in the next years to come.
Excellent. Roger, quick comment.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'd like to say. One of the issues one of the things we've noticed within Denmark, where they've got a much higher market share, is that actually the price of organic food is more aligned to non-organic, and that's a consequence of the volume. And I think what we do see in terms of small sectors, particularly like organic, is that the costs within the supply chain can be significantly higher. So from a dairy perspective, the fact that you've got to fill the pipes in the morning because organic has to be the first run of the day. You've got to fill the pipes in the morning, and then there's a load of milk left in the pipes at the end of that. So if you're only processing very small volumes, then there is a significant percentage potentially of milk that's then going into conventional, and therefore the costs of that are higher from the supply chain. And arguably, as Harriet has also talked about, because you've got relatively small facings in the retail store, then potentially there can be issues around wastage, which again is always a challenge around smaller lines. So there is an issue in terms of volume. One would argue that if we can increase the volume, then the cost within the supply chain will come down, and I think that then provides an opportunity for more of the margin to go back to consumers. Now, it's fine for me to say that to a farmer today, okay, I'll have to bite the bullet until it all gets sorted. But there is going to be that, I think, as we see the market expand, and what we can see evidence from other markets where there is a significant more higher demand for organic, we are seeing this leveling up of pricing. I think the other thing we always have to be aware of, and certainly it's something that Harriet is dealing with in the OTB, is around value rather than price. So it does come down to what do people prepare to pay, and and if I could have a Ford Escort, or I can have a Land Rover Discovery, they're a very different price point, and they both effectively do the same thing. They both get you from A to B in a relatively comfortable way, and probably at pretty much the same speed. The fact is that people are prepared to pay more for a Land Rover Discovery because it comes with a certain amount of things which they happen to value. And I think it's important when we're talking about organic is that we get away from this continual price thing, and we're actually going out and selling the value. So it's about the benefits that the product delivers rather than the features of it. And I think that's the other thing that we really need to focus on as a sector in terms of deriving that value back to the farmer, is by getting that value message through to the consumer.
Okay, sum it up, Mr. Farmer, then.
No, I'll be quick. Roger's point about real value is important. I think often we all know we don't pay the real cost for products that needs reflecting, but at the end of the day, there has got to be enough in that supply chain to give me a margin to decide to produce milk, or produce wheat, or produce beef, or produce organic milk or conventional milk. The reality is there's got to be enough margin there, otherwise I won't make that economic decision.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's draw it to a close there. Thank you, Harriet. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. A brilliant session. I'd like to thank Dakin Partnerships for the sponsoring this organic session. He likes to fly the flag for organic at Dairy Tech. Of course, thanks to the RABDF for putting on Dairy Tech this year. I think it's been a very bold decision to do what they've done. I think it's paid off handsomely, all credit to them. So finally, thanks to all the participants. Have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you live next year. Goodbye.